The rain hammered against the Brooklyn Bridge like 1,000 angry fists, each drop exploding on the steel and concrete in a chaos that matched the storm raging inside Marcus Webb's mind. It was 3 in the morning on November 15th, 1995, and the 24-year-old stood on the pedestrian walkway, his fingers gripping the cold metal railing so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Below him, the East River churned black and merciless, promising an end to everything that hurt. Marcus had been standing there for 40 minutes, though it felt like both seconds and lifetimes. His clothes were soaked through, plastered to his thin frame like a second skin. He'd lost 30 pounds in the past 3 months, ever since the diagnosis. Ever since the doctors had looked at him with those careful, practiced expressions and explained that the experimental treatment hadn't worked, that the cancer spreading through his lymphatic system was winning, that he had maybe 6 months, probably less, and those months would be filled with pain that would make him wish for exactly what he was considering now. But it wasn't just a cancer. God, if it were only that, maybe he could have found the strength to fight. His mother had died 2 years ago. His father was a ghost who disappeared when Marcus was 6, and his sister, sweet, brilliant Angela, had been killed by a drunk driver just 8 months ago. She'd been 21, 3 years younger than him, and she'd been driving home from her night shift at the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant. She'd wanted to be a doctor. She'd wanted to save lives. Instead, her life had been stolen by a man who walked away from the wreck with nothing but a broken arm and a suspended license. The insurance money from Angela's death had paid for Marcus's first round of treatments. The irony tasted like poison in his mouth. His sister had died so he could live a few months longer, only to stand here on this bridge, ready to throw it all away. But what was the point? Everyone he loved was gone. His body was betraying him cell by cell. The pain in his bones felt like broken glass grinding together every time he moved. The hospital bills were crushing. He'd already lost his apartment, his job at the bookstore, and any hope of the future he'd once imagined. Marcus leaned forward, just slightly, feeling the way his center of gravity shifted. It would be so easy. One moment of courage, or cowardice, he couldn't decide which, and all of this would be over. No more pain. No more loneliness. No more waking up in shelters or on friends' couches, pretending he was okay when he was dying from the inside out. Angela would be waiting for him, wouldn't she? And his mother. They'd understand. They'd forgive him for giving up. A gust of wind hit him hard, and for a terrifying instant, Marcus felt his feet start to lift. His heart exploded in his chest, a primal survival instinct kicking in even as his conscious mind had already decided to let go. He gasped, pulling himself back, his whole body shaking. Not yet. Not like that. He needed to choose it, needed to own this final decision. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought he was hallucinating, the sound so unexpected and surreal that it couldn't possibly be real. Music, coming from somewhere behind him on the bridge, barely audible over the rain and wind, but unmistakable. The opening notes of Man in the Mirror, that iconic song that had been everywhere when Marcus was a kid. His mother used to play it in the kitchen while she cooked, dancing with Angela and him, all three of them singing along badly and laughing. Marcus turned, confused, his vision blurred by rain and tears. The pedestrian walkway was supposed to be empty at this hour. Who would be out here in this weather, playing music? Then he saw the figure approaching through the downpour, a dark silhouette that seemed almost otherworldly in the storm. The person was wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low, carrying what looked like a portable speaker in one hand. As they got closer, Marcus could make out more details. The graceful way they moved. The deliberate, almost choreographed steps despite the slick surface. Don't do it. The figure called out, voice raised to be heard over the storm. Please, just wait. Just listen. Marcus stood frozen, one hand still gripping the railing, torn between the decision he'd almost made and the bizarre interruption of this stranger. The figure came closer still, and in a flash of lightning that illuminated the bridge in stark white light, Marcus saw his face. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there was no mistaking those features, even under a baseball cap, even in the middle of a rainstorm at 3 in the morning on the Brooklyn Bridge. Michael Jackson stood 15 feet away from him, rain streaming down his face, one of the most famous people on the planet, standing on a bridge in Brooklyn in the middle of the night. The speaker in his hand was playing his own music, and his eyes, Even in the darkness, Marcus could see them, were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that felt like it could burn through steel. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. Somehow, impossibly, Michael Jackson was here, and he was looking at Marcus like his life depended on what happened next. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Marcus felt like he'd been dropped into an alternate reality where the rules of the universe no longer applied. Michael Jackson. The Michael Jackson. The man whose face was plastered on billboards and magazines across the world. The artist who'd sold hundreds of millions of records. The icon who was currently in the middle of the History World Tour, one of the biggest concert tours ever planned. What was he doing here? Why was he on this bridge? And how had he known Marcus was about to jump? Michael took a slow step forward, his movements careful and deliberate, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any second. "My name is Michael," he said, though of course Marcus already knew that. "And I know you're in pain. I know you think there's no way out. But I'm asking you, please step back from that railing. Give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes of your time." Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came out. His brain was struggling to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of cosmic joke. He was dying. He'd lost everything. He'd come to this bridge to end his suffering, and now one of the most famous people on earth was asking him for 5 minutes. The absurdity of it all made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. "This isn't real," Marcus finally managed, his voice hoarse. "You're not real. I'm hallucinating. The cancer's in my brain now, or I'm already dead and this is some weird afterlife thing." "You're not hallucinating," Michael said firmly. He set the speaker down on the wet pavement, letting the music continue to play. It had shifted to Heal the World Now, another song that brought back memories Marcus didn't want to face. "I'm very real. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere until you step away from that edge." "Why?" The word burst out of Marcus like a sob. "Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I'm nobody. I'm dying. Everything I loved is gone. So why would you, of all people, give a damn about whether I jump off this bridge?" Michael's expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable passing across his features. "Because I know what it's like to stand where you're standing. Not physically on this bridge, but mentally, emotionally. I know what it's like to hurt so badly that death seems like the only escape. I know what it's like to feel like the world would be better off without you. And I also know that those feelings are lying to you." He took another step closer, and Marcus didn't pull away. 3 years ago, I was in a hotel room in Moscow," Michael continued, his voice softer now but no less intense. "I just finished a show. 70,000 people had been screaming my name. But when I got back to my room, I was alone. Completely alone. And I'd been taking too much medication, trying to deal with the pain from an injury, trying to deal with the pressure, the accusations, the constant scrutiny. I had pills in my hand, a whole bottle, and I stood in that bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror, thinking about how easy it would be to just take them all, to make everything stop." Marcus felt his breath catch. Was this real? Was Michael Jackson actually sharing something this personal with a complete stranger on a bridge at 3 in the morning? "What stopped you?" Marcus whispered. "A phone call," Michael said. "My daughter called. She was just a baby then, but I heard her crying in the background when the nanny answered. And I realized that even though I felt alone, even though I was in pain, there were people who needed me. Not Michael Jackson, the performer, not the king of pop, but me, Michael, the father, the son, the person." He was close enough now that Marcus could see the rain on his eyelashes, could see the scars from plastic surgeries that tabloids love to dissect, could see the humanity in his eyes that rarely came through in photographs or videos. "You think you're nobody," Michael continued, "but you're wrong. You're somebody to someone, even if you can't see it right now. And more than that, you're somebody to yourself. Your life has value. Your story isn't finished." "My story is a tragedy," Marcus said bitterly. "My sister's dead. My mother's dead. I have cancer that's killing me. I've got nothing and no one. What kind of story is that supposed to become?" "The kind where you fight," Michael said. "The kind where you survive. The kind where 20 years from now, you're standing on a different bridge, helping someone else who's where you are right now. Your sister, what was her name? Angela, Marcus said, tears mixing with rain on his face. Angela, Michael repeated. Did she fight? When things were hard, did she give up? No, Marcus admitted. She worked 2 jobs to help pay for my treatments. She never complained. She always said we'd get through it together. Then honor that, Michael said fiercely. Honor her fight. Honor your mother's love. Honor your own strength by choosing to keep going. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying the pain will disappear. But I am saying that you have the power to choose life, even when life is hard. Especially when life is hard. Marcus felt something breaking open inside him, years of grief and pain and fear spilling out. I'm so tired, he sobbed. I'm so tired of hurting. I'm so tired of losing people. I'm so tired of being scared. I know, Michael said gently. Believe me, I know. But tired doesn't mean finished. Hurting doesn't mean hopeless. Scared doesn't mean defeated. He extended his hand toward Marcus. Step back. Please, step back from that railing and give yourself another chance. Give tomorrow a chance. Marcus looked at the hand reaching toward him, at the face of a man who could be literally anywhere in the world but had somehow ended up here, on this bridge, at this moment. The odds of this were astronomical. The chances of Michael Jackson being in New York, being awake at 3 a.m, being on the Brooklyn Bridge, being here at the exact moment Marcus was about to jump, it was impossible. And yet here he was, real, present, offering help. Maybe that meant something. Maybe that was a sign. Or maybe it was just random chance, and Marcus was looking for meaning where there was none. But as he looked at Michael's outstretched hand, he realized something. He could always come back to this bridge. Death would always be an option. But right now, in this moment, there was another option standing in front of him, drenched in rain and refusing to leave. And maybe, just maybe, he owed it to Angela, to his mother, and to himself to take that hand and see what happened next. Marcus's fingers slowly released their death grip on the railing. His hand trembled as he reached toward Michael's, and when their palm connected, he felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in months. Connection. Human touch that wasn't a doctor's examination or a pitying pat on the shoulder. Michael's hand was warm despite the cold rain, and his grip was firm, pulling Marcus gently but decisively away from the edge. The moment Marcus's feet were safely on the pedestrian walkway, several feet from the railing, his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the wet concrete, his body shaking uncontrollably as the full weight of what he'd almost done crashed over him. Michael immediately knelt beside him, pulling off his own long coat and draping it around Marcus's shoulders. It smelled like expensive cologne and rain, and it was still warm from Michael's body heat. Breathe, Michael instructed, his hand on Marcus's back. Just breathe. You're okay. You're safe. You made the right choice. Did I? Marcus gasped between sobs. What happens now? What happens tomorrow when you're gone, and I'm still dying and nothing has changed? Everything has changed, Michael said firmly. You chose life. That's everything. He sat down fully on the wet pavement beside Marcus, seemingly unconcerned about ruining what were probably designer clothes. But I understand what you're saying. The problems that brought you here don't disappear just because you step back from the edge. So we're going to deal with them. Marcus laughed bitterly, wiping his face with hands that were still shaking. You're going to cure my cancer, bring back my sister, make the pain go away. No, Michael admitted. I can't do any of those things. But I can help you fight. I can connect you with the best doctors. I can make sure you have a place to live and food to eat. I can help you find reasons to keep going. Will you let me do that? It was surreal. Marcus felt like he was in a dream, or maybe he had jumped after all and this was some bizarre hallucination his dying brain had conjured up. But Michael's presence was too solid, too real. The rain was too cold. The ache in Marcus's bones was too persistent. This was happening. Why? Marcus asked again, needing to understand. I'm serious. Why would you do this? You could write me a check and walk away with a clear conscience. You could call 911 and let them handle it. Why are you sitting on the ground in the rain with a complete stranger? Michael was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. When I was younger, I wanted to save the world. he said finally. I wrote songs about it. We are the world, heal the world, man in the mirror. I thought if I could reach enough people with my music, I could make a real difference. And maybe I did, for some people. But somewhere along the way, I realized that sometimes the most important thing you can do isn't reach millions. It's reach one person who needs help at exactly the right moment. He turned to look at Marcus directly. I'm here because I believe everything happened for a reason. I couldn't sleep tonight. I was in my hotel, and I felt this overwhelming urge to go for a drive. My security team thought I was crazy, but I insisted. I told my driver to take me to Brooklyn across the bridge. I didn't know why. But then I saw you standing there, and I knew this is where I was supposed to be. You're who I was supposed to find. Marcus wanted to dismiss it as celebrity delusion or spiritual nonsense, but something in Michael's voice made him pause. There was a conviction there, a certainty that was hard to argue with, and the timing was undeniable. 5 minutes later, and Marcus would have been in the river. 5 minutes earlier, and he might have bolted at the sight of someone approaching. What do you want from me in return? Marcus asked, because in his experience, nothing came free. A story you can tell? Good press? Some kind of redemption. I want you to promise me something, Michael said. Promise me that you'll fight. Not just today, not just tomorrow, but really fight. Fight the cancer. Fight the grief. Fight the voice in your head that says giving up is easier. And promise me that if you ever get to the other side of this, you'll help someone else the way I'm trying to help you now. What if I don't make it to the other side? Marcus asked. What if the cancer wins? Then you'll die fighting, Michael said simply. But you won't die alone, and you won't die thinking that your life didn't matter. Because I'm going to make sure you know, every single day, that it does matter, that you matter. The rain was starting to ease up, shifting from a downpour to a steady drizzle. Marcus pulled Michael's coat tighter around himself and felt something shift inside him. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was too soon for hope. But it was something, a willingness to see what tomorrow looked like. A curiosity about whether this strange, impossible night could actually lead somewhere other than the darkness he'd been courting. Okay, Marcus said quietly. I promise. I'll fight. Michael smiled. And even in the dim light from the bridge's lamps, it was a famous smile that had graced 1 million magazine covers. But it was also something more personal, more genuine. Good. Then let's get you somewhere warm and dry, and we'll start figuring out the next steps. He stood up and helped Marcus to his feet. Marcus swayed slightly, weak from cold and emotional exhaustion, and the cancer that was still eating away at him from the inside. Michael steadied him, and together they walked toward the end of the bridge where a black SUV was parked, hazard lights flashing. A man in a suit, security, Marcus assumed, stood beside it, holding an umbrella and looking both concerned and confused. As they approached the vehicle, Marcus realized that his entire life had just pivoted on this one encounter. He'd come to the bridge to end his story, and instead, he'd been given a chance to write new chapters he couldn't even imagine yet. Angela would have told him to take it. His mother would have told him to be grateful. And for the first time in months, Marcus found himself wanting to listen to those voices instead of the ones telling him to give up. Michael opened the car door and gestured for Marcus to get in. I'm taking you to the hospital first, he said. Get you checked out, make sure you're okay. Then we'll get you set up somewhere safe. And tomorrow, we start fighting for real. Marcus climbed into the warm interior of the SUV, and as Michael slid in beside him, he realized something profound. He'd spent the last few months believing that miracles didn't exist, that the universe was cold and random and cruel. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe miracles did happen. Maybe they just looked different than you expected. Not like divine intervention from the clouds, but like a superstar in the rain refusing to let a stranger die. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity that left Marcus's head spinning. Michael hadn't been exaggerating when he said he'd help. Within 24 hours of that night on the bridge, Marcus found himself sitting in an office at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, one of the best oncology hospitals in the world, meeting with doctors he never could have afforded to see. Michael had made calls, pulled strings, and somehow arranged for Marcus to be evaluated by a team of specialists who were willing to look at his case with fresh eyes. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a renowned oncologist with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude, sat across from Marcus reviewing his medical files. Michael sat beside Marcus, having insisted on being present for the consultation. He'd worn a surgical mask and kept his baseball cap on, trying to maintain some anonymity, but Marcus could tell the medical staff knew exactly who he was. They were just professional enough not to make a big deal about it. "Your previous doctors weren't wrong," Dr. Reeves said carefully, looking up from the files. "Your cancer is aggressive, and it has spread significantly. However, there have been some developments in treatment protocols in the last 6 months that your previous team may not have had access to. There's a new combination therapy being tested that's shown promising results for cases like yours." Marcus felt his heart start to beat faster. Promising how? Like, might buy me a few extra months promising? Or actually might survive promising? "I can't make guarantees," Dr. Reeves said. "But in the clinical trials, we've seen some patients achieve complete remission. Others have had significant tumor reduction and extended life expectancy by years, not months. You're young, and other than the cancer, your organs are healthy. That works in your favor." "What's the catch?" Marcus asked, because there was always a catch. "The treatment is experimental," Dr. Reeves explained. "It's intense. The side effects can be brutal. You'll be sick for months. You'll lose your hair. You'll have pain, nausea, fatigue worse than what you're experiencing now. And there's no guarantee it'll work. You might go through all of that and still not make it." "But there's a chance," Michael interjected. "A real chance." "Yes," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "There's a real chance." Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process this information. 3 days ago, he'd been standing on a bridge ready to die because he'd been told there were no options. Now he was being offered a lifeline. It was terrifying and exhausting and overwhelming, but it was something. "How much does it cost?" Marcus asked, because that was the other catch. There was always a financial catch. "Already handled," Michael said before Dr. Reeves could answer. "Everything's covered. Your treatment, your medications, your hospital stays, everything. You just focus on fighting." Marcus turned to look at Michael, emotions churning in his chest. "I can't let you do that. Do you have any idea how much cancer treatment costs? We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more." "I do know," Michael said calmly. "And I don't care. Money is just paper. Your life is real. Your life matters. And I made you a promise on that bridge that I'm going to keep." "I don't understand you," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Michael pulled down his surgical mask briefly, his expression serious. "Maybe you will eventually. For now, just accept the help. Let someone care about what happens to you. Can you do that?" Marcus felt tears burning his eyes again. He'd cried more in the last 3 days than he had in the entire year before. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll do the treatment. I'll fight." Dr. Reeves smiled. "Good. We'll start next week. In the meantime, we need to get you stabilized, get some nutrition into you, and make sure you're as strong as possible before we begin." The consultation continued for another hour, with Dr. Reeves explaining the treatment protocol in detail. Marcus tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to the sheer impossibility of the situation he found himself in. 4 days ago, he'd been homeless, hopeless, and hours away from suicide. Now he was sitting in one of the best cancer centers in the world with one of the most famous people on the planet footing the bill. It didn't make sense. It violated every rule of how the universe was supposed to work. After the meeting, Michael took Marcus to an apartment in Manhattan. It wasn't huge, but it was clean, furnished, and had a view of Central Park. "It's yours for as long as you need it," Michael explained, handing Marcus a set of keys. "The rent's paid up for the next year. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in your size in the closet, and a phone with my private number programmed in. You call me anytime, day or night, if you need anything. Understood?" Marcus walked through the apartment in a daze, running his hands over furniture that was nicer than anything he'd ever owned. There were books on the shelves. He'd mentioned loving to read during one of their conversations. There was a stereo system with a collection of CDs. There were art prints on the walls. Someone had put thought into making this place feel like a home, not just a temporary stop. Michael, Marcus said, turning to face him, why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's because you felt called to drive across a bridge. People don't do what you're doing without a reason. Michael sat down on the couch and was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. When I was 11 years old, I was already performing professionally. I didn't have a childhood. I didn't have friends my own age. I didn't have anyone who saw me as just a kid who needed protection and love. I had people who saw me as a product, a moneymaker, a star. And that's followed me my entire life. He looked up at Marcus. For years, I've tried to make up for that by helping children. I built Neverland Ranch as a place where sick kids could come and just be kids for a day. I've donated millions to children's hospitals and charities. But sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it for them or for the child I used to be, the one who needed saving and never got it. So I'm what? Marcus asked. A stand-in for little Michael Jackson. No, Michael said firmly. You're a person who deserves to be helped. You're someone who was about to die, and I had the power to stop it. How could I not? How could I walk away from that bridge and live with myself knowing I'd let you jump? Marcus sat down on the couch beside him. Most people would have called the cops and moved on with their lives. I'm not most people, Michael said with a slight smile. For better or worse. They sat in silence for a while, two people from completely different worlds who'd been thrown together by fate or chance or divine intervention, depending on what you believed. Finally, Marcus spoke. I'm going to pay you back somehow. I don't know how, but I will. I'm not a charity case. I don't think you're a charity case, Michael said. I think you're a fighter who got knocked down and forgot how to stand up. I'm just giving you a hand getting back on your feet. What you do after that is up to you. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, then I guess I better not waste this chance you're giving me. That's all I ask, Michael said. He stood up and headed toward the door. Get some rest. Eat something. I'll check in tomorrow. And Marcus, welcome back to the land of the living. I think you're going to be surprised by what you're capable of. After Michael left, Marcus stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, thin, pale, haunted, but alive, still alive, and that was something. 9 months later, Marcus stood in a different kind of place, not a bridge over dark water, but a community center in the Bronx, facing a room full of teenagers who'd been referred there by schools and social workers. They were kids at risk, kids who'd seen too much, kids who were struggling with depression, addiction, loss, and hopelessness. Kids who reminded Marcus of himself not so long ago. My name is Marcus, he said, his voice stronger now than it had been that rainy night. And I'm here to tell you that your story isn't over yet. The treatment had been hell, just as Dr. Reeves had warned. There had been days when Marcus had been so sick he couldn't get out of bed. Days when the pain was so intense he'd beg for it to stop. Days when he'd questioned whether survival was worth the cost. But Michael had been there through all of it. Not every day. He had his own life, his tour, his obligations, but often enough. Phone calls when Marcus felt weakest. Visits to the hospital that had to be coordinated with security teams. Text messages at 3 a.m. when Marcus couldn't sleep, reminding him why he was fighting. And slowly, impossibly, the treatment had started to wake. The tumors had shrunk. His blood markers had improved. By the 6th month, Dr. Reeves had used the word remission with cautious optimism. By the 8th month, she'd used it with genuine excitement. Marcus wasn't cured. He'd need monitoring for years, maybe forever. But he was alive. He was getting stronger. He was winning. The kids in the community center stared at him with varying degrees of skepticism and interest. Marcus recognized those looks. He'd warned them himself once. The look that said, "Why should I listen to you?" The look that said, "You don't know what it's like." The look that said, "Nothing you say is going to change anything." I know some of you don't want to be here, Marcus continued. I know some of you are thinking this is a waste of time, that your problems are too big, or too complicated, or too painful for some stranger to understand. But I'm going to tell you something that's completely true. 9 months ago, I was standing on the Brooklyn Bridge at 3 a.m, ready to jump. That got their attention. A few kids sat up straighter. Others exchanged glances. They hadn't expected that level of honesty. I had cancer, Marcus said. I'd lost my mother and my sister. I was homeless. I was in pain every single day. And I decided that dying was better than living. I convinced myself that my life had no value, that nobody would care if I was gone, that ending it all was the only logical choice left. He paused, letting that sink in. But then something happened. Someone showed up. Someone who didn't know me anything, who had every reason to be somewhere else. And that person refused to let me jump. He talked to me. He listened to me. And then he helped me. Not because he had to, but because he believed my life was worth saving, even when I didn't. Who was it? A girl in the front row asked. She looked about 16, with purple streaks in her hair and scars on her forearms that suggested she understood darkness. Marcus smiled. That's not important. What's important is that he saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. He saw potential. He saw tomorrow. He saw possibilities. And because of that, I'm standing here today, cancer-free, healthy, alive, building a life that 9 months ago I didn't think was possible. He walked closer to the group. I'm not here to tell you that everything will be okay if you just think positive thoughts. I'm not here to pretend that life is easy or fair. It's not. Sometimes life is brutal and cruel and heartbreaking. But I am here to tell you that you're stronger than you think, that you matter more than you know, and that giving up might seem like the easy choice, but fighting, really fighting, is where the real power is. Over the next hour, Marcus shared his story in more detail. He talked about the treatment, about the pain, about the moments when he'd wanted to quit. But he also talked about the moments of connection, of hope, of small victories that added up to survival. He talked about learning to ask for help, about accepting that strength sometimes means admitting you can't do it alone. After the session, several kids came up to talk to him individually. The girl with purple hair, whose name was Destiny, told him she'd been cutting herself and thinking about suicide. A boy named Carlos told him about his brother who'd been killed in gang violence. A quiet kid named Aaron admitted he'd been hoarding pills, planning to take them all when things got too hard. Marcus listened to each of them, really listened, the way Michael had listened to him. And he gave them his phone number, the number to the center, resources for help. He couldn't save all of them. He knew that realistically. But maybe he could save one. Maybe that one would save another. Maybe that's how change actually happened, not in grand gestures, but in individual moments of connection. As he left the community center that evening, Marcus pulled out his phone and called Michael. They talk regularly now, their relationship having evolved from savior and saved into something more like friendship. How'd it go? Michael asked. Good, I think, Marcus said. There was this one girl who reminded me of Angela. Same fire in her eyes, same determination mixed with pain. I gave her my number. I hope she calls. She will, Michael said confidently. You know why? Because you know what it's like. You've been there. That authenticity matters more than you realize. I couldn't have been there if you hadn't pulled me back, Marcus said. Not for the first time. We pulled each other back, Michael corrected gently. You think that night was just about me saving you. Marcus, I needed to be on that bridge as much as you needed someone to show up. I needed to remember why I do what I do. I needed to remember that one life matters. That connection matters. You gave me that gift as much as I gave you anything. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying this forward. I promised you I would, and I meant it. I know you did, Michael said. That's why I believed in you from the start. After they hung up, Marcus walked through the streets of the Bronx as the sun set, painting the sky in shade of orange and pink. He thought about that night on the bridge, about how close he'd come to ending everything, about how different his life looked now compared to how he'd expected it to end. He thought about Angela and his mother, and he liked to believe they'd be proud of what he was building. A life dedicated to helping others who stood where he'd once stood. A life that honored their memories by fighting for people who felt like fighting was pointless. Marcus had started speaking at schools and community centers twice a week. He was also back in school himself, studying social work, determined to make this more than just a hobby. He wanted credentials to go with his experience. He wanted to build programs that could reach more people, help more kids, save more lives. The cancer checkup still happened every 3 months, and every time Marcus sat in that waiting room, he felt the old fear trying to creep back in. What if it had returned? What if the remission was temporary? What if he'd survived all of this only to lose the fight later? But then he'd remember something Michael had told him. You can't live your life afraid of dying. You have to live it determined to make every day count. And that's exactly what Marcus was doing. Every single day counted now. Every conversation with a struggling teenager. Every phone call at midnight from someone who'd found his number and needed to talk. Every moment he spent building something meaningful from the ashes of what he'd almost thrown away. 3 years after that night on the Brooklyn Bridge, Marcus received a call that made his heart skip. Michael's assistant informed him that Michael wanted to meet, and it was important. They arranged to meet at a private location in Los Angeles, where Michael was recording his next album. When Marcus arrived, he was led through a maze of hallways to a studio where Michael sat at a piano, working on a melody. Marcus, Michael said, standing up with that famous smile. Look at you. You look healthy. Strong. How are you feeling? 5 years cancer-free as of last week, Marcus said proudly. Dr. Reeves says if I make it to 7, my chances of it never coming back go up significantly. That's wonderful, Michael said, genuine joy in his voice. He gestured to a couch. Sit. I want to talk to you about something. They sat, and Michael's expression became serious. I've been working on something. A foundation. I want to call it the Bridge Project. It'll focus on suicide prevention, mental health support, and helping people who are dealing with terminal illness find hope and resources. I want you to run it. Marcus felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. What? You're already doing the work, Michael said. The speaking engagements, the counseling, the outreach. But imagine having real resources behind it. Funding, staff, programs that could reach thousands of people instead of dozens. You could build something that lasts, something that saves lives every single day. Will you do it? Marcus stared at him, overwhelmed. Michael, I'm not qualified to run a foundation. I'm still in school. I'm just a guy who's trying to help because someone once helped me. That's exactly what qualifies you, Michael insisted. You understand what it's like to be at the bottom. You know what people need because you needed it yourself. And you've spent 3 years proving that you can make a difference. I'll provide the funding and the infrastructure. You provide the vision and the heart. Together, we can save a lot of lives. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. You've already given me everything. You saved my life. You paid for my treatment. You gave me a home and a purpose. And now you want to give me this. I want to give the world this, Michael corrected. You're just the person I trust to make it happen. So what do you say? Will you help me build something that matters? Marcus thought about Destiny, the girl with purple hair who'd called him 6 times in the middle of the night during her darkest moments and was now 3 years clean and planning to go to college. He thought about Carlos, who'd left his gang and was working construction while mentoring younger kids to keep them out of the life he'd escaped. He thought about Aaron, who'd flush his pills and was now studying to be a therapist. He thought about the dozens of others he connected with, helped, supported, and sometimes saved. He thought about Angela and his mother, about the love they'd given him and the strength they'd modeled. He thought about that night on the bridge when he'd been seconds away from ending everything. And he thought about the man sitting in front of him, who'd refused to let him die and had spent 3 years proving that one person's choice to care could change absolutely everything. Yes, Marcus said. Yes, I'll do it. Let's build something that saves lives. Let's make sure that everyone who stands on a bridge at 3 in the morning has someone who shows up. Let's change everything. Michael smiled, and in that moment, Marcus understood something profound. That night on the bridge hadn't just been about Michael saving Marcus. It had been about 2 people finding each other at exactly the right moment, both needing to remember that life was worth fighting for, that connection was powerful, that one choice could ripple out and touch hundreds of lives. Michael had needed to save someone as much as Marcus had needed to be saved. And from that mutual need had grown something beautiful, a friendship, a purpose, and now a foundation that would carry the message forward long after both of them were gone. The Bridge Project launched 6 months later with a gala event that drew celebrities, philanthropists, and mental health advocates from around the world. But more importantly, it drew people who'd been where Marcus had been. People who'd stood on their own bridges, literal or metaphorical, and had chosen to step back. People who wanted to be part of making sure others made that same choice. In his speech that night, Marcus stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. Michael sat in the front row, beaming with pride. 3 years ago, Marcus began, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge ready to die. I convinced myself that my life had no value, no purpose, no future. But someone showed up that night who refused to accept my conclusion. Someone who saw potential I couldn't see. Someone who proved that one person who cares can change everything. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. I can't tell you that everyone I tried to help has survived. That wouldn't be honest. Mental health struggles are complex. Terminal illness doesn't always have happy endings. But I can tell you this, every single person deserves a chance to find out if tomorrow might be better. Every single person deserves someone who shows up and says, your life matters to me. And that's what the Bridge Project is about. Showing up, caring, refusing to let people suffer alone. The foundation grew rapidly, establishing hotlines, support groups, and resource networks across the country. Marcus hired people who'd been through their own struggles, recovering addicts, suicide attempt survivors, people who'd battled terminal illness and won. He built a team that understood from experience what it meant to need help and what it meant when someone actually provided it. 5 years after that night on the bridge, Marcus stood in front of an audience of 500 people at a conference on suicide prevention. He shared his story once again, though it never got easier. But afterward, a young woman approached him, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life, she said. 2 years ago, I heard you speak at my school. I was planning to kill myself that week. But you gave me your number and told me to call if I needed to. I called you at 2 a.m, and you answered. Do you remember? Marcus did remember. Her name was Sophie, and she'd been dealing with sexual abuse, depression, and PTSD. He'd talked to her for 3 hours that night, then connected her with resources, stayed in touch, and supported her through a healing journey. Of course I remember you, Marcus said. How are you doing now? I'm thriving, Sophie said, smiling through her tears. I'm in therapy. I'm back in school. I'm alive because you cared enough to answer the phone. And I wanted you to know that I'm studying social work now, too. Because of you. I want to do what you do. I want to save people the way you saved me. Marcus felt the weight of that moment settle over him, the ripples spreading outward. Sophie would help others, who would help others still. The chain of caring that had started with Michael on the bridge was growing, branching, reaching people Marcus would never meet but who would live because of choices made on one rainy night 3 a.m. 10 years after his suicide attempt, Marcus received another call from Michael. His voice was tired but content. I wanted you to know, Michael said, that the Bridge Project just helped its 10,000th person. 10,000 lives, Marcus. 10,000 people who got help because you were willing to accept help that night. Because you offered it, Marcus corrected. None of this happens without you showing up. We showed up for each other, Michael said, just as he had years before. That's what I want you to understand. Saving lives isn't about one hero swooping in. It's about people choosing to connect, to care, to show up for each other when it matters most. You've built something incredible. Your sister and mother would be so proud. Marcus closed his eyes, letting those words wash over him. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for seeing something in me I couldn't see, for refusing to give up on me, for giving me a reason to fight. Thank you, Michael replied, for fighting, for living, for proving that one life saved can save thousands more. You've changed everything, Marcus. Never forget that. When Marcus hung up the phone, he walked to his window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, someone was struggling. Someone was standing on their own bridge, wondering if tomorrow was worth seeing. Someone was in pain and didn't know where to turn. But now, because of the Bridge Project, because of the work Marcus and his team did every single day, that person had somewhere to call. Someone who would answer. Someone who would show up and say, your life matters. Please don't give up. Marcus thought about the man he'd been 10 years ago, broken, dying, hopeless. And he looked at the man he'd become, strong, purposeful, alive. The journey between those two versions of himself had been brutal and beautiful, painful and triumphant. He'd lost so much, but he'd gained even more. A purpose that filled him with meaning, connections that reminded him he was never truly alone, and the absolute certainty that life, even when it was hard, was always worth fighting for. As the sun set over the city, Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd go back to the Brooklyn Bridge. Not to jump, but to stand in the exact spot where Michael had found him, to remember, to honor that moment, and to silently promise Angela, his mother, Michael, and himself that he'd spend every remaining day of his life making sure that night's miracle continued to spread, one life, one choice, one moment of connection at a time. The hidden night when Michael Jackson saved a life had indeed changed everything. But the real miracle wasn't just in the saving. It was in what Marcus did with that second chance, building a legacy of hope that would outlive them both, touching lives they'd never meet, in ways they'd never fully know. And that, Marcus realized, was exactly how one rainy night could echo through eternity, proving that sometimes the most important thing anyone can do is simply refuse to let someone suffer alone. The end.